I've always wanted a GBA Micro, but even at the lowest price I could find on eBay, those little guys are going for $160, a whole $60 over what it cost when the thing came out. And because I'm sure nobody actually wants to pay that much for an almost 20-year-old handheld, I went for the next best option. Today, I've got the Anbernic RG300X. It's essentially a little emulation machine that has a case that is meant to rip off the GBA Micro. Well, if you haven't heard of them, Anbernic is essentially a company that sells a bunch of different little handhelds that are mainly meant for emulation and to, well, rip off other designs of Nintendo consoles. Now to start out by mentioning that these devices can be very finicky. When I first turned mine on, it turned on normally for about 5 seconds, and the screen glitched out, and the device then just refused to display anything. I couldn't turn it off, I couldn't reset it, it just wouldn't do anything at all, really. So I had to take it off the back by just undoing a few screws, disconnecting the battery, then letting any power left in the device itself discharge so it can completely reset and actually let it boot properly. At least that's what I think happened, because it did boot up once after doing that. I also reinstalled the operating system to the micro SD card to be sure, and it proceeded to do that a couple more times, as I said, during the review process. So if you do get one of these, be aware that there could be a few issues like what I ran into. But Anbernic is in the process of getting mine back as I returned it to them, and they should be sending me out a new one, and that's all happening during the processing and recording of this video. So to make the video, I just got another one off Amazon as a replacement for the one I had, and I'm probably just going to give this one to my wife once I actually get mine back. But with that out of the way, let's look at what's in the box. To open it, just grab it by the bottom half and top half of the boxes and let it slide open. The device comes wrapped in plastic and has a small cover, and that's all that's in the section of the box. Next, we pull out the cardboard on the bottom of the box. There's a micro SD card, a manual, and a USB-A to C cable for charging. And on a quick note, from what I've heard, if you try to use a fast charger on the device, it may short out the battery. So if possible, I would say to try and stick to the charger that came with the device only. Next, we'll take a quick look at the specs. The device does only have a 2-core CPU that goes up to 1 GHz per core, and then also has 512 megabytes of RAM. The one I got comes with a 16GB micro SD card already pre-inserted with the operating system. It also has a 64GB micro SD card for game storage. It has a 3-inch IPS screen with a 480 by 640 resolution. Officially, it supports up to a 256GB micro SD card, but I have a 400GB micro SD card in mine, or had in mind when it was working. And interestingly, it has a headphone jack, a micro HDMI port on it, so you can connect to an external display. The battery is supposed to last around 6 hours, and that is 2.7 inches by 5.3 inches by 0.7 inches. Compared to the GBA Micro's 1.97 inches by 3.98 inches by 0.68 inches, so only a little bit bigger all things considered. Anyways, let's get back to the console itself. If you've taken one look at the device, the RG300X does have a few more buttons than the GBA Micro, and the GBA SP. This has the A, B, X, and Y buttons, along with the left and right bumpers and triggers, so you aren't stuck only emulating Game Boy games, for example. With this, you can emulate consoles like the SNES or PS1. The SD cards it comes with do actually have quite a lot of preloaded ROMs installed onto it, so depending on how you feel about purchasing pirated games, you aren't really able to avoid that when purchasing this device. Since the device is based on the GBA Micro and all I've got is a GBA SP, let's compare the two real quick. The L and R buttons on both devices are very clicky, which I honestly really like, and is the reason why I didn't really like the new 3DS as well, because the buttons weren't really that clicky and I thought they were always on the verge of breaking. The D-pad and the face buttons on the GBA SP personally feel a little bit better than the RG300X's. The buttons just feel kind of squishy on the Anbernic, and then it doesn't really matter, but I do like the clickiness as well as the Anbernic's start and select buttons. The screen on the Anbernic is also a bit brighter, which is very nice since the screen on the original SP wasn't all too bright, even though it did have a backlight built into it. So the screen on the Anbernic is definitely a major plus for it, and the audio on devices aren't too different. Though considering the kind of games you'll be playing on this, there isn't really much room for the audio to be that bad. Now, I was also doing a little bit of research on the device after I bought it, since it seems like a few people are installing a different operating system onto the device. I didn't really get a good chance to do that since my original one just kind of died. So let's take at the default operating system real quick. The device with pretty much any operating system does load up fairly quickly. It's got a few different tabs of items: settings, applications, emulators, and games. These settings are super basic, mainly you're able to switch the time, wallpaper, sound, and able to connect to a computer via an FTP connection. So if you're fine with turning the device off and just putting stuff onto your SD card, then you never need to touch this really option. I didn't touch it myself, as I didn't want to bother with it, and again, it's just super easy to just take out your SD card, slap it in your computer, put whatever you want on there, take it out, and you're done. Next up is the Applications tab. All we've really got is a basic file browser, an input tester, a media player, and a clock. It does also come with a few pre-installed games that aren't a part of the emulators, though these probably aren't what you bought the console for. Then there is the Emulators tab. It comes pre-installed again with quite a few emulators for quite a few different consoles, the prominent ones being the NES, Game Boy, Genesis, SNES, PS1, and the GBA. The performance on the PS1 emulator does leave a bit to be desired. The games do run, but the frame rate is a little choppy. Granted, I've never actually played an actual PS1. When I had been playing Bomberman on it, it seemed to run a bit better, so I think the performance is just kind of bad on any 3D games. And I did test performance on some GBA and SNES games as well. The games seemed to run perfectly fine. Side note, but I did try Cave Story on this as well as one of the other pre-installed games. When running it at 240p, it ran fine, but when switching it to 480p, the performance tanked, which is kind of expected since the device really isn't that powerful. So if you're mainly going to be using this thing to play any of the emulators that it comes with, I'd say you'd probably be pretty happy with it for what it is trying to be. A knockoff GBA Micro that happens to be able to play a few other consoles games on it. So after all that, is the device worth it? Personally, I don't think so, at least not at full price. I got it on sale around Christmas for $40 on Anbernic's website. A week after I bought it, I saw it was going for $50, and at full price it is going for $80. Now, if you have any modern or even older smartphone, you could probably just buy something like the Backbone or the Razer Kishi for an extra $20 at $100, and you get to play everything at a high resolution, along with not having to worry about the device getting all finicky on you or having some other random issues if you accidentally plug it into a fast charger. Well, I do think it's kind of worth it if you really want an emulation device and like the novelty of it looking like a GBA Micro. I also think there's other options you should be looking at, like I mentioned before. But hey, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.